see in my clinic. But like literally every single one of those things that I just mentioned, every single one, if you look at the research with connections back to the gut microbiome, they all show that. You would find, by the way, similar things, a similar pattern in people who suffer with autoimmune issues, with allergic issues, with metabolic issues like obesity or type 2 diabetes, hyperlipidemia, coronary artery disease. You would find this similar pattern in people with hormonal issues. My friend Jessica Murnane just released a book about endometriosis yesterday. Endometriosis, very clearly connected back to damage to the gut microbiome. I mean, I'm not going to go so far as to say that this is everything, but this is a part of the story. And so I think it's very important for people to understand that the gut is critical to digestive health. The gut is also critical to immune health, metabolic health, hormonal health, to our mood, to our cognition, the way that our brain works. So this is, to me, without trying to be hyperbolic about it, I feel like this is where human health begins, is that we have to take care of our gut and nurture it, because if we don't, problems start to show up.
And so what are some of the things that we can be doing to look after our gut? Obviously, diet is a big part of it, and that's a lot of what your book is about, is how to eat right. Because obviously, we are what we eat. The food that we consume fuels not just the energy for our body that we're required to function, but the digestive function that extracts all those minerals and phytonutrients from the food. What are some of the things that we should be doing? Because obviously, the standard American diet is pretty shocking, and that that kind of diet is clearly causing disease. So what can people do, and what should people do? If you're not vegan in the audience, if you're not plant-based already, like, where can people get started to start to shift towards a diet that is a bit more protective to the gut and our digestive health?
It's interesting. Our gut microbiome is basically a imprint or a reflection of our diet and lifestyle choices. So, and diet is the number one thing, but lifestyle. But if you're not sleeping, if you're not exercising, if you're not doing these other things, you can still get yourself into trouble. When it comes to diet, here's the thing that I would say is, and I know that you know how I feel about this, Ravi, which is that I honestly hope that there are people in the 450 that are here right now. I hope that there are people who are not vegan. I really do, because you need to hear this, which is that your gut microbes, their food is your food. The dietary choices that you make will shape and mold your gut microbiome like a piece of clay.
Mm-hmm.
You can turn it into whatever you want it to be, and it can forgive you for past choices. My gut microbiome has forgiven me, thankfully. But you can turn it into whatever you want it to be, and the key is to understand where the value exists. The value, what your gut microbes thrive on, what they love, is dietary fiber.
Mm-hmm.
This is why the title of my book is Fiber Fueled. Your gut is optimal in terms of its function when you are fueling it, when you are supporting it with dietary fiber, which is a problem in the United States and most Western industrial countries, because we're not getting enough of it. 95% of Americans don't even get the minimal recommended amount of fiber. If you want to do one thing, and this is to literally everyone, even if you are vegan, because you could be vegan and not be doing what I'm about to say. If you want to do one thing, it is to increase the variety, increase the diversity of plants in your diet. The reason being that every single plant has its own unique types of fiber,
Mm-hmm.
its own polyphenols, vitamins, minerals, phytonutrients, all of which help to shape the gut microbiome. Every single plant has its own unique families of bacteria that it will support. When you eat a broad diversity of plants, you are going to get a healthier gut microbiome as a result of that choice. And so no matter who you are, no matter what dietary pattern you follow, this should be a core part of your dietary philosophy. And that's what I teach in my book, is that Even if you're vegan, you should be doing this. But if
Mm.
you're not vegan, come join the party. Let's hang out.
Absolutely. Can I get a show of hands in the audience? But give us a hand emoji if you're not vegan or plant-based. Let's see how many people who are watching who aren't. I know a few people already said that they're not vegan or plant-based.
Well, I love
Obviously,
that.
it's very clear that being vegan does not necessarily mean that you're healthy. You can live on Oreos and French fries, and that's vegan, right? No animal suffered. It's probably going to have a lower environmental footprint, but it's not going to have a very good effect on your health. Whereas the difference between vegan and a whole food plant-based diet, food in its most natural form, food in its untouched form, where your body has the ability to process it and absorb nutrients in a way that hasn't already been extracted by a machine. You could drink clarified fruit juice all day, every day, and that's not going to be any good for you with all the fiber removed and the pulp and everything. I know from what I've learned through a few different gut health doctors is that a clarified, filtered apple juice, for example, when you drink it, it has a similar effect to what meat has in your body and what it does to your arteries, the way the gut microbiome reacts to that substance, that liquid. And then the TMAO, which I can never pronounce, TAMO.
TM, yeah, TMAO, right?
TMAO, thank you, which is produced it's produced in the gut and obviously goes into your body and affects your arterial function, can also happen on plant-based foods that are obviously refined as compared to animal products. So I think that I think this is where people really struggle. A lot of people assume that just vegan automatically means healthy, but it is, as you say, that diversity of plants. On the topic of meat, though, I'd love to hear what you have to say. You might have a point. I think you were going to make a point before I said that.
Well, and my point, just to riff off of what you were just saying, Robbie, is that this is the reason, just to be clear for everyone who's here, this is the reason why I use the term plant-based.
Mm.
Because to me, when we talk about veganism, and I'm vegan, but the motivation in veganism to me is animal welfare and the
Mm-hmm.
environment. That is the motivating factor. And it doesn't say anything other than you have excluded animal products entirely from your life.
Mm-hmm.
That is what the vegan choice is. But again, like you can have an unhealthy diet that's vegan. A plant-based diet is to me more focused and motivated by human health. So as a medical doctor, that's where my emphasis is publicly. And I open it up in terms of the conversation at times, but to me, my focus is about human health. A plant-based diet is about eating real food.
Mm-hmm.
Fruits, vegetables, whole grain, seeds, nuts, and legumes. And so that's why I think it's important to make that distinction. Of course, there's value to a vegan diet. Of course, there is. It's great for the animals. It's great for the environment. But we can do better for human health if we're focusing on the real food that contains fiber.
Now, sometimes, and there was a comment here that just said, I went plant-based and within weeks my stomach was completely dissented. I'm not quite sure what I mean by that. I haven't been
Probably distended.
distended,
Yeah.
sorry. I haven't been the same since I now have SIBO, SIBO, help. Now, I've heard this mentioned quite a lot. I've heard a lot of people mention SIBO quite a lot. And I've seen and spoken to many people who've had trouble with plant-based diets and have ended up with gastrointestinal issues. What kind of things could be going on there that kind of makes some people's diets a little bit harder to adapt into a plant-based diet?
Yep. So I think this is a very important question because people will start a plant-based diet and in some cases not feel well, and they will say, that diet is not for me. And we hear this all the time. We don't need to name any names, but there are plenty of influencers that we've seen in the last 5 years who had gut health issues, switched to a vegan diet, sometimes very restricted vegan diets like fruit only, something like that, and got themselves into trouble. And then they bail and they say veganism doesn't work. Plant-based diets for gut health don't work. Well, we have to understand what's actually happening inside the body. I think that's the key. We have to actually understand what we're talking about here, which is that the person who has a damaged gut will struggle in the very beginning when they start to introduce a plant-based diet.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a reason why. Your gut microbiome is required to unpack this type of food.
Mm-hmm.
You can't unpack plant-based foods without a healthy gut microbiome, without a gut microbiome to support you.
Mm-hmm.
And I think of the gut, these microbes, I think of it like a muscle. And that muscle could be weak or it could be strong, but it can be trained. It can be made stronger. The person who suffers with gut health issues, that muscle's not weak. And when you take a plant-based diet and you introduce it, you may struggle because you are doing too much fiber, too many complex polysaccharides and FODMAPs than your gut can handle because it's a weak gut. So we have to go low and slow. That's what I talk about in the book. Low and slow. We start to introduce these foods and ramp them up over the course of time. And we think of it, if the gut is a muscle, we think of it like we go to the gym and we do the amount of weight that we're actually capable of lifting. Don't do more. Don't hurt yourself. Do the amount that you're actually capable of lifting. And guess what?
People rush in, right?
I'm sorry?
People rush into these changes.
People, they dive in. It's like a cannonball. All right. It's like a cannonball. And then all of a sudden they're like, whoa, what did I get myself into? And I can't handle this. And it's like, you just have to ease your body into this. And when you do this, you will find like you would not believe, Robbie, how many messages I get like literally on a daily basis, which I love, from people who are like, I couldn't eat onions and now I'm eating onions all the time. I couldn't eat beans, now I'm eating beans all the time, because they introduce them low and slow. They slowly ramp them up. They allow that muscle to develop, to strengthen. And guess what? It goes from weak to strong because you are working it with a plant-based diet. The other thing I want to add real quick, Robbie, is that the first rule of any doctor should say this. The first rule is, what are we treating? What are we treating? If I don't know what I'm treating, how can I treat you? So if you have underlying issues, like, for example, celiac disease, that needs to be identified. If you have constipation, I'm going to tell you right now, if you have constipation and you start ramping up on a plant-based diet really fast, you're going to be miserable. Gas, bloating, distension, the way that this person who says that they have SIBO described it. And it may be constipation that's the root of the issue. And we have to get the bowels moving and get that out of the way so that you are ready to start to introduce the fiber and ramp it up slowly over time.
So what are the solutions? You know, obviously this is we've got another 30 minutes to chat. We can't give all the answers now, but ultimately, like, there's a lot of people out there who don't know where to begin. We're very pleased to say we've got a lot of non-vegans, non-plant-based people in the audience. They're eating chicken and beef and pork and fish and all these different animal products. And, you know, sure, they taste great. They're probably a lot cheaper than a lot of fruits and vegetables are sometimes. A lot of processed food is cheaper, but we want to get more plants in the diet. Where do people get started? Should we just, as you say, clear everything out and eat slow and increase it, or what should we do? Where should we start?
First of all, let me say that when I made my transition, I didn't make it overnight. It took me probably a year and a half, 2 years to really make my transition. And so I would first of all say that, like, changing towards a plant-based diet is not an all or nothing phenomenon. And I celebrate all advances, all movements towards a more plant predominant diet. Yeah, I do that too. I celebrate all bowel movements. But yeah, I celebrate, right. If you are 10% plant-based, I was 10% plant-based. And if you go from 10 to 30, I am right there cheering you on, and I'm so excited. If you go from 30 to 50, awesome. Let's keep the momentum rolling. And I am willing to bet that when people do this, Robbie, and I think that you would agree with me, when people do this, they go from 10 to 30, from 30 to 50 in terms of plant-based. Yeah. They're going to feel so much better. They're going to feel so much better that they're going to want more, and they're going to keep wanting more. So for me, it's about sustainability. It's about starting with choices that you actually are willing to make, to not feel like, gosh, I'm doing this plant-based diet and it's like really tough. No. Start with food that you love and ease into it, starting with the food that you love, and start to ramp up over the course of time. Progress over perfection, one day at a time.
Amazing. Well, if you're just joining us, hi, I'm Robbie. This is Plant-Based News, and we're talking to Dr. Bulsiewicz about gut health, about microbiome, about everything that can happen between your mouth and your butt, which is amazing, and all the things you should be putting in your mouth and for better health. So let's go to the audience. Annoyingly, one sec, I've got to change my one. when my phone goes into dark mode, I can't read any of the questions on Instagram.
Oh my gosh,
It's a,
that happens to me too. I haven't figured that out. I'm gonna have to
you
figure
have
that
to
one out.
turn your dark mode off and then go back into your questions, and then it comes up.
Yeah.
Right. So we have a question here from Kirsten Bryan, who says, "How do you feel about impossible meat impossible burger or Beyond Burger or whatever? How do you
Yeah.
feel about like meat substitutes as a form of protein intake when we are kind of eating, I guess?"
I'd be curious to hear how you feel about it, Robbie, but here's my take. This is my take on these. Number one, clearly great for the animals. Number two, I fully believe, despite what anyone will argue, that this is definitely better for the environment.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So from a vegan perspective, this is fantastic. From a human health perspective, we can definitely do better.
Mm-hmm.
Is it a step in the right direction? Is it a step in the right direction? I would say yes. There was a study done by Chris Gardner, who's at Stanford, that showed us that by consuming these types of burgers, that you actually can reduce your TMAO exposure. TMAO is connected to coronary artery disease, stroke, chronic kidney disease, peripheral vascular disease. You don't want TMAO.
Can you tell us what TMAO stands for? I need to practice it so I can say it.
Yeah, so TMAO was discovered at the Cleveland Clinic about 8 years ago, and it stands for trimethylamine oxide.
Trimethylamine
And
oxide.
I might be messing up the O.
Try something. I need
Yeah,
to practice it as well.
if Alan's there, correct me.
Yeah, Alan, Dr. Al, come to our rescue.
Yeah. I'm thinking it's trimethylamine oxide, but I might be messing up the O on the spot, being put on the spot here. But anyway, TMAO was discovered at the Cleveland Clinic as an independent, meaning that they are studying this and like controlling for other factors, an independent risk factor for coronary artery disease. So if your TMAO increases, this suggests that there's an increased risk of having a heart attack. And they've had multiple studies from different parts of the world that have supported this concept at this point. And so where TMAO comes from is through the consumption of carnitine or choline in our diet. Well, carnitine, where does that come from? Carn, C-A-R-N, comes from meat. Mm-hmm. And so the carnitine, what happens is the carnitine goes down to our gut microbes, and our gut microbes will actually transform it into TMA, trimethylamine. And trimethylamine will travel to the liver, where it then is converted into TMAO, which is the thing that we believe is damaging to the blood vessels. Mm-hmm. So anyway, what's interesting about this, Robbie, is that the bacteria in the colon are necessary to make this conversion. Someone added trimethylamine oxide, so I was right. Thank you. I was sweating that for a second there. I was second guessing myself. So the gut bacteria are required for this conversion to happen. So here's a study that they did like literally 7-8 years ago, Robbie. They took a vegan, and this vegan, in the name of science, agreed to eat a steak. And then they took an omnivore who ate the same steak, like a similar steak. And the omnivore, their TMAO level rose 600% in the next 24 hours.
Wow.
The vegan had no TMAO at the beginning and no TMAO at the end, because the vegan did not have the gut microbes to produce TMAO. But for the people who bail on veganism and go back to eating meat, they showed in a different study that if you take a person who is vegan and you expose them to carnitine or choline, within about 4 weeks, they actually changed their gut microbiome and evolved the ability to start producing TMAO again. So veganism is not lifelong protection if you start eating meat again, but veganism is protection from TMAO if you continue to be vegan. And so that's why these plant-based burgers, I do think that they're advantageous over traditional hamburgers in the sense that they don't raise your TMAO, but I think we can do better. I think that, like for me, it's a grilled portobello or a black bean burger. That's what I'll take.
Great, good answer. I love that. Yeah, I mean, so my opinion of them is that they're great transition foods, and I used to crave them a lot when I first went plant-based 7 years ago. But I genuinely do not enjoy them now. I find them too fatty, too oily, too salty. I don't crave meat at all. I prefer to have a bowl of black beans, a bowl of tempeh and brown rice and broccoli and or tofu or anything like that. I actually crave these foods. I mean, 10 years ago, if I told you that I love tofu, I would have laughed. I would have laughed. I'd be like, tofu? You're crazy. Who eats tofu? Now I'm obsessed with this stuff. I absolutely love it. And we will speak about tofu and soy in a minute, but let's just try a few more of these questions. We're getting a lot of questions around IBS. What is IBS? Why do so many people get it, and what kind of things can we do about it?
Okay, so this stands for irritable bowel syndrome, and we have very clear criteria of how we define IBS. In fact, it's my friend and one of my mentors who created these criteria. His name is Doug Drossman. He's at the University of North Carolina, and I trained with him. So the criteria, or basically what we look for to diagnose irritable bowel syndrome, is a few things. Number one, abdominal pain. All right, all patients with IBS have abdominal pain or some sort of discomfort. Number two, a change in bowel habits. Could be diarrhea, could be constipation, could be fluctuating between both, but there's a change in bowel habits. You're not having good formed normal bowel movements. And then the third thing is that one of the hallmark findings of IBS is that when you poop, you feel better. Mm-hmm. They have pain that improves with a bowel movement. This is one of the hallmark findings of irritable bowel syndrome. The root of IBS is a little bit complicated. You and I could talk for a half hour on this topic. I'll spare everyone. Let's break it down and call it this. Clearly, damage to the gut microbiome is a part of the story, if not the biggest part of the story, when it comes to irritable bowel syndrome. And so the solution to IBS is to heal the gut. And the way that we heal the gut, as described in my book, in Fiber Fueled, is we feed the gut its preferred fuel, which is fiber. Dietary fiber turns into short chain fatty acids, which reverse the pathogenesis, the way that IBS develops.
So our gut, obviously, as we've discussed, is this huge universe of trillions of bacterial cells. And there's this fantastic book, which I highly recommend, called 10% Human, which suggests that for all the number of cells that exist in our bodies, we're only 10% human, and the other 90% is actually bacterium, which is mind-blowing, really, when you think about it. I think you or Dr. Desmond told me that we carry around about 2.5 kgs of bacteria with us at all times. It's kind of like a passenger in many ways, and it's, I mean, if you wanted to give it a kind of specific terminology, it's a symbiont. Well, they are a symbiont because they are many. They're not just one. They're not really, I mean, they are living, they're living entities, they're living organisms, but they act as like a hive mind, don't they? And the idea that these beings, entities, live within us, on us, in our eyebrows, in our eyes, up our nose, up our butt, in our ears, in our mouth, they're everywhere between our fingers. They literally cover us in every way. They're in us and on us in all different shapes and forms. But do they control who we are? Do they control our minds, our thoughts, our behavior? You know, are they driving us or are we driving them? That's the big question.
I think it's balanced. I think it's a balance, and I think it's more complicated than saying one person's in control over the other. You know, I joked in my book that we are just, you know, mere zombies basically doing the will of our bacterial overlords, right? So, but what they do have, Robbie, is they do have the ability to produce, this is a chemical factory, all right? This is a chemical factory, and they have the ability to produce chemicals that influence the way our brain functions, that influence our impulses, or what foods we desire. One of the studies that suggested that this is the way that it works was a chocolate study. Some people don't care about chocolate.
They're crazy, clearly.
Totally. Some people crave chocolate, desperately want chocolate. And when they looked at these people who craved chocolate, they want it so bad, they found in their urine a special chemical produced by the gut microbes. And it suggested that this chemical is probably the reason why we crave chocolate so much is that our gut microbes are basically telling us, they're sending a signal. So, but at the end of the day, we're the ones who open our mouth and chew and swallow. We're the ones who make those decisions.
But could we be influenced by, I don't know what they call neuropeptides? What's the communication mechanism between the gut and the brain? Could we be being influenced by
100%.
our passengers when you're walking down the sugar aisle, the sweet aisle, the chocolate aisle, that somehow they know where you are and they give you a little like push, like, just grab that chocolate, just grab that sugary bar? Because I feel like that sometimes. I genuinely feel like when I'm in the supermarket, there is a psychological connection between what I call the aisle of temptation. As you leave the supermarket, you have the aisle of temptation where it's all candy. And I genuinely have to fight every fiber of my being not to pick up something.
Right. So there is no question that they are capable of having an influence over our brain function and our impulses. There is no question. Right? And there's a number of different ways, and it gets a little bit complicated in the ways in which this works. But let me give you another tangible example. Like we don't have a study to say that when you're in the supermarket and you actually go down the sweets aisle, that there's some sort of biochemical change that occurs in that moment. You know, that would be a split-second thing. But here's what we do have, Robbie. I want to relate this for the 520 people hanging out with us right now to imagine that you are sleep deprived. Okay, so you just had a horrible night. You maybe got 3 hours of sleep. The next day, obviously you feel like crap. But what are you hungry for? What are you trying to eat? And the answer is simple carbs. People eat like bread and sweets when they're sleep deprived. And when they've looked at the gut microbiome, what's fascinating, Robbie, is that literally just 2 days of sleep deprivation has been shown to cause a shift in the gut microbiome where it starts to have the same pattern that you see in people who are obese. So this shift that occurs in the gut microbiome from sleep deprivation makes your gut microbiome like a person who is obese, and then these gut microbes that are inflammatory microbes, they want to be fed.
Right, very interesting.
And so they want the simple carbs.
I mean, so not many people probably have heard of a fecal transplant. It doesn't sound very nice, but it is an innovative procedure where you can take the poop of a healthy person, often a vegan or plant-based person, and actually transpose it into a person with serious health trouble, like ulcerative colitis and all kinds of lower intestinal gut trouble. And some of the fascinating studies I've read about how they've had people who are quite lean and thin. They've done a poop transplant or a fecal transplant into somebody who is morbidly obese, and that person has actually, they found a sort of a heightening of weight loss within that person just by doing that transplant. It really goes to show that our gut bacteria that exist within us are in many ways kind of driving our cravings and driving our lifestyle, like you said. But in the absence of kind of going out and getting a poop transplant, which is not something most people are going to want to do unless they're absolutely desperate, how should we be thinking about some of these things? Because obviously we're given antibiotics by our doctors when we're ill. We probably abuse our bodies by eating too much junk food. How do we avoid these cravings? Because I don't know what it's like. Well, I do know what it's like in the US. It's about 1,000 times worse than in the UK. But when I go into the supermarket, there is just so much temptation to eat junk food, sugary, fatty, salty food, because it clearly has some kind of biological reaction in the brain. But how do we get around that? Because it seems sometimes really hard to fight.
Yeah, I agree. I think it is hard to fight, and I think it's a sad state of affairs in our food systems that we should be unwilling to accept.
Yeah.
I think that we shouldn't accept the way that the food system is set up and then apologize for the way that they created it. I think we have to ask for change.
Right.
But because many of those foods are subsidized in the United States to make them more affordable, which is why we have a problem where this is the food that people who are of lower socioeconomic status are eating. We can't take that. We can't accept that. But anyway, to answer your question, how do we go about this? I personally think like if the question is literally like how do we go to the supermarket and not buy junk food, I think that the answer starts with, first of all, don't go to the supermarket when you're hungry.
Great advice.
So it's that simple.
Simple, but great.
Yeah, it's that simple. Because when you go and you're hungry, you're going to buy the junk food and you're going to take home way more than you intended to. And then once it's in your pantry, it's there to tempt you. So the key is to not transition the food from the supermarket back to your house. And so when we're at the supermarket, we want to be well, well satiated. Like we want to be full. We've had enough to eat, so that we can actually like buy the food that we know we need, that we know is good for us, and not drift into these places where temptation exists.
Such good advice. Let's jump into the audience and grab another question. We've got time for maybe 2 or 3 more questions.
I just want to point out real quick, how interesting is it that we call poop transplant innovative technology? I mean, what has the world come to that putting poop into people is innovative?
It's innovative, I guess, because, we probably never have thought of it before. I don't know who invented the idea, who came up with it.
The Chinese, actually. The Chinese have been doing it for a very long time, believe it or not.
Have they? That's really fun. I have to learn more about it. I find it absolutely fascinating because the world of gut microbiome can be transplanted. We can transplant organs. We can transplant, blood. We can move blood from one person to the other. All kinds of things can be moved from one human body to another. So it does make sense that a piece of a microbiome that is functioning successfully could be transplanted. Because at the end of the day, what is a microbiome? It's like a garden, right? Yeah. And if the garden is functioning as it should function, you can transplant plants from one garden to another, and that garden will flourish. So it makes perfect sense.
That's true. But if we take your microbiome, a vegan microbiome, a plant-based microbiome, and we transplant it into someone who is consuming the standard American diet, that microbiome will be dead in 4 weeks.
Interesting. Okay.
Because you have not fed it. So effectively, the peak moment is when they receive that microbiome from you.
So the diet is essential for that process. You can't.
The diet is essential to support it, because if you can't support it, then those microbes will die.
Yeah, it's like water and fertilizer. If you're putting no water and the wrong fertilizer onto your beautiful new garden, it will die.
That's exactly right. And the other thing I want to tell you real quick that's kind of interesting is there's a famous microbiome researcher from the American Gut Project who is convinced that in the same way that we are seeing mass scale extinction events with animals, with plant species on this planet, we're also seeing mass scale extinction events with gut microbes.
Wow. And
so it's a parallel thing that's occurring. And so this doctor, what they have done is they've created a doomsday biodepository where he is basically banking stool specimens from native tribal people with the expectation that we may come to a day where we as humans say we need to bring back these microbes from generations before. And that's why they're creating this bank, so that 100 years from now, we're prepared to do that if we need to.
Wow, that's fascinating. That's really incredible. Let's jump in for one more question. So this is from Angela Rebellion, and they say, how do you feel about vinegar and kombucha? I followed Medical Medium's detox diet, and in his book, he said acids and oils aren't good for you.
Okay, let's take on both of these, if that's okay. So the way I feel about oils, let me first say that for most Americans, we don't need more oil in our life. So we're getting too much of it, and most of the vegetable oils that people are consuming are full of omega-6 fats that are actually causing inflammation. So I think that we should either be no oil, or I think you can be certainly very healthy consuming some oil that is high quality, like olive oil, extra virgin olive oil. But the key from my perspective to bear in mind is that oil is inherently high calorie and zero fiber. There's zero fiber in oil, zero. Doesn't matter the source, there's zero fiber. So you take a pound of olive oil and you have 4,000 calories. You take a pound of kale and you have 100 calories. Ounce for ounce, 40 times more calories in the oil. So
it's so easy when you got your bottle of olive oil or rice bran oil or whatever, pouring it over your food. It's so easy to overdo it, right? It's
so easy to overdo it. And that's where I think if you are going to consume it, and like, let me say, I consume olive oil. but do it in moderation. I'm not reaching for the olive oil,
Yeah.
5 times a week. When it comes to the vinegars or to the acids, from my perspective, I think that there is a place for the consumption of vinegar within a plant-based diet that is perfectly healthy. Bear in mind that kombucha, particularly kombucha that you will buy at the store, is a sugar beverage.
Mm.
So that's not exactly the same. When
Is
we're
it
talking,
health food? Is it junk food masquerading as health food?
it very easily could be, Robbie. I've actually, let me be transparent and say that if there were one section in my book, I wrote my book mostly in 2019. If there was one section that I would rewrite, I would edit the section about kombucha to make it more clear that I think water is better than kombucha.
Mm.
So why are we reaching for kombucha? Now, do I think that kombucha is better than drinking soda? Yes, I do believe that is true.
Mm.
So, but nutrition is all about substitutions, and water is free, and we are blessed with clean water. Why are we not drinking it?
Mm. Such good advice. I think people don't want to drink it because they probably find it boring and compared to like sugary soda and all these other things which have all kinds of interesting effects on your body and your brain and everything else. There are so many questions I'm struggling to pick on. There's literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of questions, but I feel like we've done our best to answer all of them. I'm going to ask another question for myself, another thing that I'm interested in. I'm going to put my hands up. I do love pills and potions and lotions. Pills in the sense that like longevity type things like ashwagandha and vitamin C and all these different things that are made from plants, but they're just put into a capsule. But what about probiotics? These capsules that you buy in the supermarket that are kind of powdered bacterium dried, and when you consume it in various forms, you can either put in water and drink it, or you can consume it in a capsule, and it's meant to go in your gut and sort of populate. How successful are these pills at repopulating our gut with the bacterium that you are swallowing?
Well, there's certainly a place for probiotics. There is no question that there is a place for probiotics, that there are some people who benefit from probiotics. But the way that I would put it in terms of the hierarchy is that you start with diet and lifestyle. I would actually put prebiotics before probiotics. Prebiotics are dietary fiber. You could even do a fiber supplement. I actually use fiber supplements myself, even though I eat a plant-based diet, because I believe in the science. Probiotics would be third after those. And the issue with it, Robbie, is that if we use you as an example, you have a unique gut microbiome. It doesn't matter who we're talking about. There's no one on the planet, 8 billion people, there's no one who has a microbiome like yours. It's
Mhm.
perfectly yours. And if I give you a probiotic, I'm giving you a generic capsule, the same capsule that I gave to someone 20 minutes ago. And I'm crossing my fingers and I'm hoping that when that generic capsule hits your gut microbiome, synergy, magic, chemistry, that it happens. The problem is we won't know until we try.
Mhm.
All right. So if you do a probiotic, it should be for a tangible reason, not just because your friends are doing it or because you heard they were good. You should have a specific goal in mind, and you take it with the intent of seeing if that goal improves when you're taking the probiotic. And if it does, then I think it makes sense.
Okay, good advice. It's probably got time for one more question before I let you go. I'm just going to spin the roulette and see
Spin the roulette.
spin the roulette. Okay, so there's a lot of this one. How to treat constipation. A lot of people having this. What easy things could we do, whether we're on a plant-based diet or on a Western American diet? Like what's going on when we're constipated, and what can we do to resolve it?
Okay. So I'm gonna really surprise some people because I literally wrote a book called Fiber Fueled, and it's probably the most best-selling book about fiber ever. But I think it's important for people to understand that if you are actively constipated, if it's mild constipation, meaning that it comes and goes once in a while, increasing your dietary fiber will probably get rid of it.
Hmm.
If you have moderate or severe constipation, I'm talking about the people that come to see me or the people that have been suffering for months to years. There's a problem. When you ramp up your fiber in the face of constipation, it doesn't move through, and your gut microbes will start to extract all the gas, all the methane gas out of that fiber.
Mm.
Methane gas slows gut motility, which makes you more constipated. And you can get yourself into a vicious cycle where you're trying to overpower your constipation with plants, and you actually make your constipation worse. And these are the people who, and I know there's going to be some people who relate to this in the crowd, these are the people who they wake up in the morning, they eat a meal, and then their belly is distended like they're pregnant. And so the solution to this, Robbie, is we have to get the poop moving. When you get the poop moving, so like our heart is not the only part of our body that cares about rhythm. Our gut cares about rhythm. And when you get the bowels moving and you get into a rhythm, then you are perfectly situated to start to ramp up your plant consumption, increase your fiber, slow and low, and get on your plant-based diet, and you will thrive. And you may not need anything for your constipation once you're able to do that, but you got to get the train moving first. So how do we do that? How do we get the train moving? If you're looking for a natural approach, and again, like I am a doctor, but I am not giving medical advice. I'm just providing education. This is the way I treat my patients. Okay, but talk to your doctor wherever you live. But one of the options is magnesium plus a prebiotic supplement. Magnesium helps to draw water into the colon, specifically magnesium citrate, magnesium sulfate, or magnesium oxide. These are the ideal forms of magnesium. You take them before bedtime. You slowly increase the dose to get your bowels moving. And you can combine this with a prebiotic fiber supplement. The fiber helps to give shape and form to the stool. And so what we want ultimately is we want a soft formed torpedo-like stool. We want a sausage. This is the only form of sausage that I approve of. Okay. So we want a sausage bowel movement. And the way that we get it is softening it up with magnesium and giving it shape with the prebiotic fiber, moving it through. And once we have that thing moving through, then that's when it's like, okay, let's get the fiber on board. Let's start to ramp it up. Slow and low is the tempo.
Slow and low. And on that note, we're going to love and leave you. And thank you so much for joining us. It was really informative as always. And if you're watching and you want to get Dr. Bulsiewicz's book, please do check it out. I'm actually probably going to flip where's the camera switcher? There we go. There we go. You can read it. Fiber Fuel. There he is. There's the man. My New York Times bestseller.
Thank you, my friend.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us. As always, what a pleasure. And if you are watching and you do want to listen back, it will be available on IGTV here. And you can obviously check us out on SoundCloud, on iTunes, and on Spotify. I always forget what all these things are. And
make sure you listen to the podcast, you guys. Make sure you listen. If you enjoyed what Robbie and I just talked about, check out the podcast. You're going to love it. And
where can people find you other than on Instagram? You got a website?
I have a website. My website is called The Plant Fed Gut. So if you go to The Plant Fed Gut, plantfedgut.com. I have a free 5-day challenge there. I have an email list where basically when there's a breaking study, like a new gut health study that I want to tell you about, I send that out for free. So that's all at The Plant Fed Gut. And I have a course also that I'm going to be launching later this summer for people who are interested.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Dr. B. Hope you have a lovely day, and I'll catch you real soon.
Thank you, my friend. Thank you for hanging with me this evening.
My pleasure. Take care.
All right. Take care.
Thanks so much for joining us, everyone. I'm Robbie, and this is Plant-Based News, and we'll be back next time with more food, fashion, veganism, health, animal rights, and everything in between. If you want to, please do check out our website, plantbasednews.org, for regular vegan news, plant-based news, celebrity, health, fashion, fitness, as I said. And also, please do check out our YouTube channel for regular YouTube videos on veganism, ethics, plant health, vegan health, all kinds of things. I'm super tired. It's been a really great day, a really long day. As you can tell, I'm slurring my words. Love you all, and I'll see you soon. Take care.